At 34, Emma Carter had just lost everything that made her life feel stable. Her job was gone after the company downsized. Her relationship had ended only weeks earlier. And with rent rising faster than her savings could keep up, she found herself packing the last of her belongings into an aging pickup truck with nowhere certain to go. Then came a phone call she never expected. A distant uncle she barely remembered had died, leaving her one final possession, an isolated ranger cabin hidden deep in the Bitterroot Wilderness, nearly 30 miles from the nearest town. Most people would have sold it without a second thought. The cabin had no reliable electricity, no cell service, no neighbors. According to locals, nobody had lived there for more than 20 years. When Emma arrived, she quickly understood why. The roof leaked, the porch sagged, half the windows were boarded shut, and carved into the wall beside the front door were words so faded they were almost impossible to read. "Do not stay after the first snow." The locals laughed when they heard she planned to spend the winter there. A few warned her to leave before the weather turned. One old hunter simply stared at the cabin for a long moment before saying, "There's a reason every ranger abandoned that place." Emma thought they were just telling old wilderness stories. But 3 weeks later, while digging beneath a collapsed woodshed behind the cabin, she uncovered something buried underground. Something that explained why the cabin had been abandoned. Something that connected to a mystery nobody had solved in more than 2 decades. And once she saw what was hidden there, surviving the wilderness became the least dangerous part of her journey. Before we uncover what Emma found beneath that cabin, let me know down in the comments, where are you listening from today? And what time is it where you are right now? If you enjoy stories about survival, forgotten places, hidden family legacies, and life-changing discoveries, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's go back to the day Emma Carter first drove into the wilderness and saw the abandoned ranger cabin waiting for her. Emma Carter stared at the balance on her banking app for nearly a minute before locking her phone and slipping it back into her jacket pocket. $817. That was everything she had left after paying the final month of rent on an apartment she would be leaving in 3 days. Less than 2 months earlier, she had been working full-time for an outdoor equipment company in Missoula. She had never been rich, but she had been comfortable enough to stop checking her account every morning. Then the layoffs came. Half the department was gone in a single afternoon. Emma had walked out carrying a cardboard box containing a coffee mug, 2 notebooks, and a small potted cactus she had somehow kept alive for 3 years. At first, she believed she would find another job quickly. Then weeks passed. Applications disappeared into silence. Interviews led nowhere. Savings shrank. Her boyfriend, Kyle, became increasingly distant until one evening he sat across from her at a diner and admitted he had accepted a position in Seattle. Alone. The conversation lasted less than 20 minutes. By the end of it, Emma understood 2 things. Kyle was leaving, and he had made that decision long before telling her. 3 weeks later, she was packing the last of her belongings into storage. The phone call arrived the next morning. "Miss Carter?" the man asked. "This is Robert Hensley from Hensley & Moore Legal Services." Emma assumed it was another bill collector. "If this is about my student loans, I already spoke with—" "No, ma'am. I'm calling regarding an inheritance." That single word immediately made her laugh, not because it sounded exciting, because it sounded impossible. Nobody in her family had money. Her parents had died when she was 16. Her grandparents were gone. The few distant relatives she knew barely remembered her birthday. Yet 40 minutes later, she found herself sitting inside a small law office, listening to a gray-haired attorney explain that her uncle Walter Carter had passed away following a heart attack. Emma struggled to remember his face. She had met him only twice as a child. "There wasn't much of an estate," Robert admitted while sliding paperwork across the desk. No significant savings, no investments. But he owned a property. Emma expected an old trailer or perhaps a few acres of land. Instead, the attorney unfolded a map. Her eyes followed a red circle deep into a section of national forest. "A ranger cabin?" she asked. "Former ranger cabin," Robert corrected. "Built in the early 70s, privately owned after decommissioning." Emma frowned. "Why leave it to me?" Robert hesitated. "Apparently, you were the only family member who ever wrote back." Emma blinked. "What?" The attorney opened a file and removed a yellowed envelope. Her name appeared on the front in shaky handwriting. She remembered it immediately. When she was 17 and living with foster families after losing her parents, a letter had arrived from Uncle Walter. Most of her relatives avoided discussing the family after the tragedy. Walter had been different. He had sent a short note asking how she was doing. Emma had written back. One letter, nearly 2 decades ago. She stared at the envelope. "That's why." Robert nodded. According to his final instructions, yes. Emma left the office carrying a folder that essentially contained ownership of a remote cabin she had never seen. She should have sold it immediately. Rationally, that was the obvious choice. Instead, she spent the next 2 nights staring at photographs included in the file. The cabin sat among towering pine trees beside a narrow stream. The structure looked weathered but sturdy. Something about it kept pulling at her attention. Maybe because it represented the only thing in her life that wasn't already disappearing. 3 days later, she rented a small utility trailer, loaded her remaining belongings, and pointed her truck toward the wilderness. The drive took most of the day. Highways became county roads. County roads became gravel. Gravel eventually became little more than dirt winding through dense forest. Cell service disappeared almost an hour before sunset. Emma checked her phone repeatedly out of habit before finally accepting the fact that it had become nothing more than a clock. The forest grew thicker with every mile. Mountains rose on either side of the narrow road. By the time she reached a tiny town called Alder Creek, she needed fuel. The gas station consisted of 2 pumps and a wooden building that looked older than she was. An elderly man stood outside repairing a lawnmower. He glanced toward her truck. "You're not from around here." "That obvious?" Emma asked. "Only strangers stop for gas after 4 in the afternoon. Locals know better." "Know better about what?" The old man smirked. "Driving mountain roads in the dark." Emma laughed politely and began fueling the truck. A few minutes later, the man wandered closer. "Where are you headed?" "Old ranger cabin near Black Pine Ridge." The smile vanished from his face. "The Carter place?" Emma nodded. The man looked toward the mountains for several seconds. "Thought that place was empty." "Not anymore." "You're staying there?" "That's the plan." He scratched his beard slowly. "By yourself?" Emma suddenly felt less confident. "Yes." The old man studied her for a moment. "You got enough firewood?" "Not yet." "Generator?" "No." "Satellite phone?" "No." He sighed heavily. "Then your first week is going to be interesting." Before Emma could ask another question, he returned to repairing the mower. The conversation left an uncomfortable feeling in her stomach. She drove away as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Darkness settled quickly beneath the trees. The final stretch of road barely qualified as a road at all. Branches scraped against the truck. Several times she wondered if she had taken a wrong turn. Then, just as she considered turning back, the forest opened into a small clearing. There it was, The ranger cabin. It looked exactly like the photographs and somehow much worse. The porch leaned noticeably to one side. Moss covered sections of the roof. Several windows were boarded shut. The surrounding woods seemed unusually quiet. Emma stepped out of the truck and listened. No traffic. No distant voices. Nothing except wind moving through pine branches. Complete isolation. She should have felt nervous. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in months, nobody expected anything from her. No interviews, no bills arriving in the mail, no awkward conversations about her future. Just silence. She grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the porch. The wooden boards creaked beneath her boots. The front door opened with a groan. Dust floated through the beam of light. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and cold stone. A rusted stove sat in one corner. Shelves lined the walls. Furniture remained covered beneath white sheets. It felt less like an abandoned building and more like someone had left temporarily and forgotten to return. Emma explored room by room. Kitchen, storage room, small bedroom, tiny loft overhead. Everything appeared untouched. Then she noticed something near the entrance. Scratched into the wall beside the door, almost hidden beneath years of fading and dirt. She raised the flashlight closer. The letters were uneven, carved deeply into the wood. Someone had used a knife. Her heartbeat slowed as she read the words. Do not stay after the first snow. Emma stared at the message for several seconds. A chill crept down her spine despite the warm evening. She glanced over her shoulder toward the dark forest outside. Then she laughed quietly to herself. It was probably a joke, some old warning left by a hunter, nothing more. Yet later that night, after unloading only enough supplies to get through the evening, she found herself checking the lock on the front door twice before going to sleep, and long after the lantern was extinguished. She lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness, unable to stop thinking about the words carved into the wall and wondering who had written them. Emma woke before sunrise because the cabin was colder than she expected. For several seconds, she remained inside her sleeping bag, staring at the dark ceiling while trying to remember where she was. Then the scent of old wood and the distant sound of wind moving through the trees brought everything back. The ranger cabin, the inheritance, the warning carved beside the door. She checked her watch. 5:42 a.m. The forest outside was still wrapped in darkness. Her breath was faintly visible in the cold air. Great, she muttered. Guess we're doing this. The first challenge appeared less than 10 minutes later. Water. The cabin's sink produced nothing but a weak, gurgling sound. Emma spent nearly half an hour inspecting pipes before realizing the old system hadn't functioned in years. Fortunately, Uncle Walter's paperwork had mentioned a stream nearby. Armed with 2 empty containers, she followed a narrow trail behind the cabin. Morning fog drifted between the pines. The deeper she walked into the forest, the quieter everything became. No traffic, no distant engines, just birds and the occasional snap of branches under her boots. After several minutes, she heard running water. The stream was wider than expected, clear enough to reveal smooth stones on the bottom. Emma knelt and filled both containers. On the way back, she noticed something odd. A rusted metal marker attached to a tree. Most of the paint had disappeared. She brushed away moss and discovered faded numbers stamped into the metal. 17B. It looked official. Maybe an old forestry marker. She made a mental note to examine it later. Back at the cabin, she spent most of the morning cleaning. Dust coated every surface. Dead insects filled the corners. Several drawers contained forgotten items left behind by previous occupants. Most were useless. Broken flashlights, empty notebooks, rusted utensils. Yet the process felt strangely satisfying. Every shelf she cleaned made the cabin feel slightly less abandoned. Around noon, she decided to inspect the exterior. The roof needed repairs before winter. Several porch boards were rotten. One shutter hung crooked from a single hinge. As she circled the cabin, she noticed something else. Behind the structure stood a woodshed leaning heavily to one side. Half the roof had collapsed years earlier. Tall weeds grew through gaps in the floorboards. Emma approached cautiously. The shed contained old axes, rusted tools, and piles of decaying lumber. Nothing valuable. But one detail caught her attention. The dirt beneath part of the floor looked disturbed compared to the surrounding ground, as though someone had dug there long ago. Before she could investigate further, a distant engine echoed through the trees. Emma froze. She hadn't seen another vehicle since arriving. The sound grew louder. Moments later, an aging pickup emerged from the forest road. The truck stopped near the cabin. A large man with gray hair stepped out carrying a chainsaw. He wore a faded hunting jacket and moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in the wilderness. "You must be Walter's niece," he called. Emma nodded. "And you are?" "Name's Hank Morrison." He extended a hand. "I own property about 5 miles north." Emma shook it. His grip felt like iron. "The guy at the gas station mentioned somebody might check on me." "That was Earl." Hank grunted. "He worries too much." Then he looked around the cabin. "Though in your case, maybe not enough." Emma laughed. Hank didn't. Instead, he studied the roof critically. "You've got problems." "I've noticed." "That chimney leaks." He pointed toward the north side. "Porch won't survive another heavy snowfall. And if you're staying through winter, you'll need about 6 times more firewood than you've got." Emma glanced at her small pile of logs. 6 times? Maybe 8. Her smile faded. Hank nodded as if confirming a diagnosis. "Thought so." For the next hour, he helped her inspect the property. Unlike most people she had met in cities, Hank rarely wasted words. When he spoke, it was usually because the information mattered. He showed her how to identify dead standing trees suitable for firewood. He explained which parts of the stream froze first during winter. He pointed out animal tracks she had completely missed. Deer, fox, coyote. Then they reached the woodshed. Hank stopped abruptly. "Huh." "What?" Emma asked. He stared at the collapsed structure. "Looks worse than I remember." "You've been here before?" "Years ago." He didn't elaborate. Emma noticed him looking toward the disturbed patch of dirt beneath the floorboards. His expression changed briefly. Not fear exactly, more like discomfort. "Something wrong?" she asked. Hank hesitated. "No." The answer came too quickly. They returned to the cabin. Before leaving, Hank handed her a folded map. "Old forestry routes." "Thanks." "You'll want them." He started toward his truck before stopping. "One more thing." "Yeah." Hank looked at the cabin for several seconds. "Did you find anything unusual inside?" Emma immediately thought of the warning carved beside the door. "Depends on your definition of unusual." "Humor me." She described the message. "Do not stay after the first snow." Hank's face remained unreadable. "You know who wrote it?" Emma asked. He looked away toward the trees. "No." Another answer that sounded incomplete. But people used to talk about this place. Talk about what? Hank opened his truck door. Small towns always tell stories. That's not an answer. Hank sighed. The last ranger who stayed here left suddenly. When? Long time ago. What happened? Nobody knows. Emma folded her arms. You're really good at making things sound mysterious. Hank almost smiled. Maybe. Then he climbed into the truck. Get that firewood stacked before dark. The engine started. And lock your door at night. Before Emma could ask another question, he drove away. The remainder of the afternoon passed in hard work. She gathered fallen branches, split wood, and organized supplies. Physical exhaustion proved surprisingly therapeutic. Every task had a clear purpose. Unlike job applications and unanswered emails, effort produced immediate results. By evening, she had established a rough routine. Water from the stream, firewood by the porch, food inventory inside the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, she felt useful. As sunset painted the mountains orange, Emma sat on the porch steps eating canned soup heated over the stove. The forest looked peaceful, beautiful even. She began to wonder if perhaps she had finally found a place where life could slow down. Then she heard it. Clang. The sound came from somewhere behind the cabin. Metal striking metal. Emma sat upright immediately. The noise echoed through the trees. Clang. A second impact. She set down her bowl. Hello? No answer. The forest returned to silence. Emma grabbed the flashlight and walked around the cabin. The woodshed stood motionless in the fading light. The stream continued flowing normally. Nothing moved between the trees. She searched for nearly 15 minutes and found absolutely nothing. Eventually, she convinced herself it had been a branch falling against something metallic. An animal, perhaps. Yet when she returned to the porch, she noticed something she was certain hadn't been there earlier. Fresh mud. A single muddy footprint near the bottom step. Not an animal track. A boot print. Emma stared at it. The impression looked recent, very recent. She slowly turned toward the darkening forest. The trees stood silent beneath the evening sky, watching, waiting. After a long moment, she backed into the cabin and locked the door. Later, as darkness settled completely over the wilderness, she found herself sitting beside the stove with Hank's map spread across the table. Most of the routes were marked clearly: streams, trails, old ranger stations. But near the edge of the map, someone had drawn a circle in faded red ink. The mark surrounded an area less than a mile from the cabin. There was no label, no explanation, just a circle. Emma frowned. She didn't remember seeing it earlier. Outside, something cracked loudly among the trees. She looked toward the window. Nothing appeared beyond the darkness. Yet for the second night in a row, sleep came much later than she wanted. And as she drifted off, her thoughts kept returning to three things the warning carved into the wall: Hank's strange reaction to the woodshed, and the muddy footprint that had appeared beside her porch. Emma slept poorly and woke several times during the night. Each time she checked the windows expecting to see someone standing outside in the darkness. Each time she found only trees swaying beneath the moonlight. By dawn, she felt foolish for being so uneasy. The muddy footprint could have been old. The metallic noise could have come from any number of things. Isolation had a way of making ordinary sounds seem significant. At least, that was what she told herself while preparing breakfast. The morning air felt noticeably colder than the previous day. Winter was still weeks away, but the mountains already carried hints of it. Emma stood on the porch drinking coffee from a dented metal mug and watching mist drift above the trees. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful again. Then she looked down at the muddy footprint beside the porch. It was still there. During the night, the edges had hardened. Curious, she crouched beside it. The tread pattern looked modern, not decades old, not even months old. Somebody had been standing there recently. Very recently. She pulled out her phone and took a photograph, even though there was no signal to send it anywhere. Something about the print bothered her. The person had been facing the cabin, not walking past it, standing there, watching. Emma spent the next hour chopping wood, trying to push the thought from her mind. Physical work helped. By mid-morning, she had established a growing stack beside the porch. Her hands hurt. Her shoulders ached. Yet the simple exhaustion felt better than anxiety. While carrying another armload toward the woodshed, she noticed movement among the trees. A flash of brown fur. She froze. A deer stepped cautiously into the clearing. It stared at her for several seconds before lowering its head and continuing toward the stream. Emma smiled. The sight eased some of the tension she had been carrying. She wasn't alone out here, but not everything sharing the forest intended harm. Later, she grabbed Hank's map and decided to explore the immediate area. The red circle she had discovered the previous night continued bothering her. If the marked location was close enough, she wanted to see what was there. The trail behind the cabin followed the stream for nearly half a mile before splitting into two directions. According to the map, the circle lay somewhere northeast. The forest thickened as she walked. Sunlight filtered through towering pines and narrow beams. Fallen needles softened every footstep. Several times, she lost sight of the trail entirely. The deeper she went, the more she understood how easy it would be for someone to become lost here. After 40 minutes, she reached a small ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Something unusual immediately caught her eye. Wooden posts, old ones, nearly hidden beneath vegetation. She approached carefully. There were 6 of them arranged in a rough line. Each carried faded orange paint, forestry markers. Yet unlike the metal markers she had found near the stream, these appeared intentionally placed to form a boundary. Emma followed them downhill. One post led to another, then another. Eventually, they ended at a clearing barely visible through the trees. At first glance, the clearing seemed ordinary. Then she noticed the ground. Several large depressions scarred the earth as though something heavy had once been buried there or removed from it. She walked among them, trying to understand what she was seeing. Nearby stood the remains of a wooden structure. Only fragments remained: rotting boards, rusted bolts, a collapsed section of concrete foundation. Whatever had stood there had vanished long ago. Emma crouched beside the foundation and brushed dirt away from the surface. Her fingers found engraved lettering: Property of U.S. Forest Service. She sat back. Another ranger station, perhaps, or some kind of outpost. But why remove it? And why mark it with a red circle on Hank's map? Before she could examine further, a voice startled her. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here." Emma jumped to her feet. A young man stood near the tree line holding a fishing rod. He appeared to be in his late 20s with dark hair and a beard that looked permanently 1 week overdue for trimming. "Sorry," he said quickly. "Didn't mean to scare you." Emma laughed nervously. "You succeeded." "Yeah, I do that sometimes." He approached slowly. "I'm Noah." "Emma," his expression changed immediately. "You're the one staying at the Carter cabin." The statement surprised her. "News travels fast," Noah grinned. "There are only about 200 people within 20 miles. News travels before it even happens." Emma found herself smiling despite everything. Noah seemed easier to talk to than Hank, less guarded. "Do you know what this place is?" she asked. He looked around the clearing. The smile faded. "Not exactly." "That's not very convincing." Noah shrugged. "Depends what version you want." "Version? Everybody's got a different story." He pointed toward the old foundation. "My grandfather said there used to be some kind of ranger facility here. My dad claimed it was a weather station. Hank thinks both of them are wrong." "What do you think?" Noah glanced toward the trees. "I think nobody talks about this area unless they have to." The answer only increased Emma's curiosity. "Why?" Noah hesitated. "You ever notice how certain places make people uncomfortable for reasons they can't explain?" "You're talking like a horror movie character." He laughed. "Fair point." They walked together back toward the trail. Along the way, Noah pointed out edible berries and animal tracks hidden among the undergrowth. Unlike Hank, who seemed to teach through criticism, Noah explained things casually. Emma appreciated that. When they reached the stream near the cabin, Noah paused. "You know the old story about your place?" Emma groaned. "There's a story?" "Of course there's a story. And—" Noah studied her face. "You really want to hear it?" "Depends how ridiculous it is. Supposedly the last ranger who lived there disappeared." Emma frowned. "Hank mentioned somebody leaving." "Most people say leaving. Older locals say disappearing." "Which do you believe?" Noah tossed a pebble into the stream. "Honestly, neither." "Helpful. Look, people vanish from stories all the time. Usually they just moved somewhere, and nobody bothered updating the rumor." Yet his tone suggested uncertainty. Before leaving, Noah handed her a small laminated card. "What's this?" Emma asked. "Radio frequency list." "For what?" "Emergency channels, weather updates, search and rescue." Emma looked up. "You think I need rescue already?" "Not yet," Noah smiled. "But winter hasn't started." After he left, Emma spent the afternoon repairing shutters and organizing supplies. The encounter improved her mood. For the first time since arriving, she felt connected to another human being. Still, questions lingered. The abandoned foundation, the boundary markers, the stories. That evening, she decided to inspect the cabin more thoroughly. There had to be something previous owners had overlooked. She started in the loft. Dust coated every surface. Most boxes contained nothing but old blankets and ruined books. Then, behind a loose wooden panel near the far wall, she discovered a narrow compartment. Her pulse quickened immediately. Hidden spaces rarely contained boring things in stories. Reality, however, often disappointed. Inside, she found only a rusted flashlight, a broken compass, and several electrical components. Yet one detail stood out. The wiring looked far newer than the cabin itself. Emma carried everything downstairs and spread it across the table. The flashlight was useless. The compass needle barely moved, but the wiring puzzled her. Someone had removed it intentionally, not decades ago, relatively recently. She followed the trail of old conduits running through the walls. Several disappeared beneath the floor. Others extended toward the back of the cabin. Why would an isolated ranger cabin require that much electrical infrastructure? The question stayed with her through dinner. After sunset, she stepped outside to gather more firewood. The forest had become silent again. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind that made every small sound seem important. Emma reached the woodpile and froze. Fresh tracks crossed the dirt nearby. Not deer tracks, not coyote tracks. Boot prints. Several of them. She slowly followed the impressions with her flashlight. They appeared from the direction of the woodshed, crossed behind the cabin, then vanished into the trees. Her stomach tightened. Someone had been here again, recently enough that the impressions remained sharp. Emma turned in a slow circle. Nothing moved. No voices, no lights, just darkness. She backed toward the cabin and locked the door immediately after entering. For nearly an hour, she sat at the table studying the boot prints through the window whenever the flashlight beam reached them. Eventually, she forced herself to stop. She was tired, paranoid, isolated. There had to be a logical explanation. Then, just before midnight, a metallic sound echoed from somewhere beyond the woodshed. Clang. Emma sat upright in bed. The same sound she had heard before. Clang. This time it was closer. She held her breath. Another impact followed. Then silence. Complete silence. She waited several minutes before gathering enough courage to approach the window. Moonlight illuminated part of the clearing. The woodshed stood motionless. Nothing appeared unusual. Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The woodshed door was open. She was certain it had been closed when she went to bed. Emma stared through the window for nearly a full minute, waiting for movement near the woodshed. Nothing happened. The open door remained perfectly still beneath the moonlight. Her first instinct was to stay inside and convince herself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe the wind had blown it open. Maybe she had forgotten to latch it. Maybe she was allowing isolation and old stories to get inside her head. Then another thought arrived. If someone really was wandering around her property at night, pretending it wasn't happening would not solve anything. She grabbed the flashlight, slipped on her jacket, and unlocked the door. The cold air hit immediately. The clearing seemed larger at night, darker. Every tree beyond the edge of the flashlight beam appeared capable of hiding something. Emma walked slowly toward the woodshed. The crunch of gravel beneath her boots sounded unnaturally loud. 20 feet from the structure, she stopped and listened. Nothing. 10 feet. Still nothing. When she finally reached the doorway, she raised the flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. Rusted tools, rotting shelves, stacks of old lumber. No intruder, no animal, no obvious explanation. Then she noticed something new. One of the old boards covering part of the floor had been moved. Emma frowned. She was almost certain it hadn't looked like that earlier. Kneeling carefully, she examined the disturbed section. Fresh dirt was visible beneath the boards. Someone had definitely been digging there at some point. Not tonight necessarily, but recently. She reached down and shifted one of the loose planks. The wood groaned. Beneath it sat packed soil mixed with small stones. Nothing unusual. Yet before she could continue, a sharp sound echoed somewhere deeper in the forest. A branch snapping. Emma froze. The noise had not come from the woodshed. It came from beyond it, somewhere among the trees. She turned her flashlight toward the darkness. The beam revealed only trunks and shadows. Another crack followed, farther away this time. Something was moving through the forest, large enough to break branches. Emma remained perfectly still. After several seconds, she heard the unmistakable sound of something running. Then silence returned. Complete silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Eventually, she backed away from the woodshed and returned to the cabin. She locked the door and spent the remainder of the night staring at the ceiling. Sleep arrived shortly before dawn. The next morning, she awoke feeling exhausted and irritated. She needed answers. More importantly, she needed to stop reacting like a frightened tourist every time something strange happened. The forest contained wildlife. Old structures settled. Branches fell. Not every mystery required a conspiracy. After breakfast, she drove into Alder Creek for supplies. The tiny town appeared exactly as she remembered. One main road, a diner, a hardware store, the gas station. Emma decided to visit the diner first. The building contained only 6 booths. 3 were occupied by locals drinking coffee. Conversations briefly paused when she entered. Not hostile, just curious. Small-town curiosity. A waitress named Linda greeted her with a smile. "You're the woman staying in Walter Carter's cabin." Emma laughed. "Is there anyone in this county who doesn't know that?" "Probably not." Linda poured coffee into a mug. "People have been talking." That's reassuring. While waiting for breakfast, Emma listened to conversations drifting through the diner. Hunting season, weather forecasts, equipment repairs, ordinary topics. Nothing about abandoned cabins or missing rangers. She almost began relaxing, until a voice spoke from the booth behind her. "You're wasting your time staying out there." Emma turned. An older man sat alone near the window. His face looked weathered by decades outdoors. "Excuse me," she asked. "That cabin." He stirred his coffee. "Should have been torn down years ago." "Why?" The man shrugged. "Bad history." "Everybody keeps saying that." "Because it's true." "What happened?" For a moment, she thought he might answer. Instead, he simply shook his head and returned to his coffee. The conversation ended there, yet it added another layer to the growing puzzle. After breakfast, she stopped at the hardware store. While purchasing nails, roofing tar, and extra batteries, she noticed an old bulletin board covered with community notices. One yellowed newspaper clipping near the corner caught her attention. The headline read, "Forest Service search suspended after 5 days." The article itself had faded beyond readability. Before she could examine it more closely, the store owner appeared beside her. "Interesting piece of history." Emma pointed toward the clipping. "What happened?" The owner hesitated. "Search operation." "For who?" "Some ranger, I think." "At the cabin?" The man immediately looked uncomfortable. "You'd have to ask somebody else." Emma was beginning to hate that answer. On the drive back, she stopped near the gas station where Earl sat outside in the same chair as before. He nodded as she approached. "You look tired." "I'm not sleeping much." "Cabin'll do that." Emma sat on the edge of a wooden crate. "Earl, can I ask you something?" "Depends." "Why does everybody act strange whenever I mention the cabin?" Earl studied her for several seconds. "Because most folks around here remember what happened." "Which was?" "Depends who you ask." Emma groaned. Earl chuckled. "You're getting the full Alder Creek experience now. Nobody gives a straight answer." "Sometimes that's because nobody knows the straight answer." He leaned back. Last ranger stationed near Black Pine Ridge was named Daniel Ross. Good man from what I heard. Then one day he wasn't there anymore. He disappeared. Officially, no. Unofficially? Earl shrugged. Stories grew over the years. What kind of stories? Enough to keep people away. Before Emma could press further, another customer arrived. The conversation ended. Yet one name now echoed in her thoughts. Daniel Ross. The first specific piece of information anyone had given her. Back at the cabin, she threw herself into work. The roof demanded attention before bad weather arrived. Climbing onto it proved far more difficult than expected. Twice she nearly lost her balance. Once, she dropped a hammer into a patch of weeds and spent 15 minutes searching for it. The small frustrations helped distract her, until late afternoon, while repairing a section near the chimney, she noticed something strange along the backside of the roof. A cable. Not modern wiring. An older insulated line running from the cabin toward the forest. Most of it had been cut away years ago. Curious. Emma climbed down and followed the remaining section. The cable disappeared among the trees behind the property. She walked nearly 200 yards before finding the end. The wire terminated at a rusted metal box mounted on a concrete platform. The structure looked old. Government issue, perhaps. Nearby stood another faded forestry marker. 17C. Emma examined the box closely. Someone had intentionally disconnected everything. Bolts removed, components stripped. It wasn't natural decay. It looked like someone had wanted the system gone. Why? She took several photographs. As she prepared to leave, something caught her eye near the base of the platform. A piece of paper trapped beneath a rock. Weathered, dirty, nearly destroyed. Emma carefully unfolded it. Most of the text had faded beyond recognition. Only a few words remained readable. Ross. Power failure. Do not return. Her pulse quickened. Ross. The same name Earl had mentioned. Daniel Ross. She folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. By the time she returned to the cabin, clouds had gathered above the mountains. The temperature dropped rapidly. Rain began shortly after sunset. Emma spent the evening beside the stove studying the damaged note. The more she looked at it, the more questions emerged. Who wrote it? Why was it hidden near the electrical equipment? What had happened to Daniel Ross? Around 9 o'clock, a knock sounded at the door. Emma nearly jumped from her chair. Nobody visited cabins in remote forests after dark. She approached cautiously and opened the door. Noah stood outside holding a backpack. Thought you might need this. He handed her a weather radio. Storm front moving in. Emma relaxed. You nearly gave me a heart attack. Sorry. Noah stepped inside. Wow, place looks better already. They talked for nearly an hour, mostly about practical things. Winter preparation, wildlife, local geography. Yet eventually the conversation drifted toward Daniel Ross. Noah's expression changed immediately. You heard about him. Everybody seems to know the name. Noah nodded slowly. Yeah. What happened? He stared into the fire. Honestly, I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the weird part. Noah pointed toward the window. Small towns remember everything. Every marriage, every fight, every accident. Yet somehow nobody can tell the same story about Daniel Ross. Meaning, some say he quit. Some say he transferred. Some say he vanished. He shrugged. All I know is that after he left, nobody stayed at that cabin for long. After Noah departed, Emma locked the door and prepared for bed. Rain hammered the roof. Wind rattled branches against the walls. The storm should have made her feel safer. Nothing could move through the forest unnoticed in weather like this. Yet shortly after midnight, As she lay beneath her blankets listening to the storm, a faint light flashed outside the window. Once, then again. Emma sat upright. The light appeared beyond the trees behind the woodshed. Not lightning. Too controlled, too deliberate. It flashed 3 times, then vanished. Emma stared into the darkness for several long seconds. Finally, she reached for the flashlight and the weathered note containing Daniel Ross's name. For the first time since arriving, she was no longer wondering whether something strange had happened at the cabin years ago. She was beginning to suspect that whatever secrets existed out there might not be entirely buried in the past. Emma barely slept after seeing the mysterious flashes among the trees. She spent nearly an hour sitting beside the window, watching the darkness beyond the woodshed, hoping the light would appear again. It never did. Eventually, exhaustion won. When morning arrived, rain still drummed against the roof. Thick gray clouds covered the mountains, and the forest seemed darker than usual despite the daylight. The weather radio Noah had given her crackled to life while she prepared breakfast. A calm voice announced an approaching cold front. Temperatures would drop sharply over the next several days. Higher elevations might even see the season's first snowfall. Emma glanced toward the window. The warning carved beside the door immediately returned to her thoughts. Do not stay after the first snow. She shook her head. It was just an old message. Yet she found herself staring at the gray sky a little longer than necessary. The storm made outdoor work difficult, so she focused on the cabin interior. During the morning, she reorganized supplies, sealed several drafts around the windows, and inventoried food. The numbers were not encouraging. If winter arrived early, she would need significantly more provisions. Around noon, the rain eased enough for her to venture outside. Her first destination was the location where she had seen the flashing light. Armed with her map, flashlight, and a growing sense of curiosity, she crossed behind the woodshed and entered the forest. The ground had become muddy from the storm. Every step sank slightly into the wet earth. Emma moved slowly, searching for anything unusual. At first, she found nothing. Then she spotted footprints. Fresh ones. Human. The tracks emerged from deeper within the woods and passed surprisingly close to the cabin before disappearing toward the ridge. She crouched beside one of them. The tread pattern looked similar to the prints she had seen near the porch. Not identical, perhaps, but close enough to raise questions. Someone had definitely been walking around her property recently. The tracks continued uphill. Emma followed them for nearly 20 minutes until they reached a rocky area where the trail became impossible to read. Frustrated, she looked around. That's when she noticed another marker attached to a tree. Unlike the others, this one carried no number. Instead, someone had carved a symbol directly into the bark, a circle with a line through the center. The mark looked deliberate, recent even. Emma touched the carving. The wood beneath felt relatively fresh. Somebody had made it within the last few years. But why? And who? A sudden voice behind her nearly caused her heart to stop. You're a long way from the cabin. Emma spun around. Hank stood several yards away holding a bundle of rope over one shoulder. You need to stop doing that, she said. Hank raised an eyebrow. Doing what? Appearing out of nowhere? This is the forest. People walk around. Emma laughed, despite herself. Fair enough. Hank's eyes immediately found the carved symbol on the tree. His expression tightened. Not dramatically, just enough for Emma to notice. You know what this is? She asked. No. The answer came too quickly. Again, Emma folded her arms. You're a terrible liar. Hank sighed. I've been told that. For several seconds, he simply stared at the symbol. Finally, he said, You should probably head back. Why? Weather's turning. That's not the real reason. Hank shifted the rope on his shoulder. Curiosity gets people into trouble out here. And secrets make people curious. Hank almost smiled. You're stubborn. I've been told that too. For a moment, she thought he might explain something. Instead, he pointed toward the sky. Dark clouds were gathering again above the mountains. Storm will hit before evening. Then he turned and disappeared among the trees. Emma watched him leave, more convinced than ever that he knew far more than he admitted. Back at the cabin, she spent the afternoon splitting firewood. The physical labor helped organize her thoughts. Every mystery seemed connected somehow. Daniel Ross, the abandoned electrical system, the old facility in the clearing, the strange symbol, the flashes of light. Yet the pieces refused to fit together. By late afternoon, the weather worsened. Wind swept through the forest, bending branches and scattering pine needles across the clearing. Emma carried another armload of wood toward the porch when she noticed movement near the stream. Someone was approaching. A few minutes later, Noah emerged from the trees wearing a rain jacket. He carried a fishing pack and looked annoyed. Worst fishing day I've had all year. Emma laughed. Good to see you too. Noah stepped onto the porch. Weather's making everything miserable. Then he noticed her expression. What's wrong? Emma showed him a sketch she had made of the symbol carved into the tree. Noah's reaction surprised her. He immediately recognized it. Where did you see this? Near the ridge. Noah stared at the drawing. My grandfather used to talk about that symbol. Emma leaned forward. What did it mean? I don't know. He shrugged. But he claimed rangers used it decades ago. For what? Never said. He studied the sketch again. Thought it disappeared years ago. That answer created even more questions. During dinner, Noah shared several local stories. Most were harmless. Old hunting accidents, missing livestock, strange weather events. Then he mentioned something interesting. Did anybody ever tell you about the power station? Emma immediately sat up straighter. What power station? Exactly. Noah smiled slightly. Most people don't even know it existed. He explained that years earlier, some kind of small electrical facility operated somewhere near Black Pine Ridge. Nothing major, just enough to support ranger operations. According to Noah, the entire system was dismantled unexpectedly. No public explanation was ever given. Emma thought about the rusted equipment she had discovered. When did this happen? Late 80s, I think. Late 80s. The same period connected to Daniel Ross. The coincidence felt increasingly unlikely. After Noah left, Emma retrieved the damaged note mentioning Ross and spread it beside the map. For nearly an hour, she compared locations, dates, and fragments of information. The pattern remained incomplete, but connections were beginning to emerge. Then the weather radio interrupted her concentration. The automated voice issued a new warning. Temperatures overnight could drop below freezing. Snow was possible above certain elevations. Emma glanced toward the door again. The warning carved into the wall seemed to grow louder every day. That night, the storm arrived in full force. Wind slammed against the cabin. Branches scraped across the roof. The old structure creaked constantly. Around midnight, a particularly powerful gust rattled the windows hard enough to wake her. She sat up immediately. Something felt wrong. At first, she couldn't identify it. Then she realized the sound of the wind had changed. There was another noise mixed within it, a low mechanical hum. Emma slipped out of bed and approached the window. The forest beyond the clearing appeared black and chaotic beneath the storm. Yet somewhere in the distance, beyond the trees behind the woodshed, a faint light glowed. Not flashing this time. Steady. White. Artificial. Her pulse quickened. The light remained visible for only a few seconds before disappearing again. Then the hum vanished as well. Silence returned except for the storm. Emma stood frozen beside the window. Electricity. A light source. Deep in a section of forest where nobody supposedly lived. The next morning she intended to investigate, but before she could return to bed, another sound reached her from somewhere inside the cabin itself. A soft thump from above. The loft. Emma held her breath. The sound came again, slow, deliberate, as though something or someone had just moved across the floor overhead. Emma remained frozen beside the window, staring toward the dark loft above her. The storm continued battering the cabin, but now every sound seemed secondary compared to the soft movement she had just heard overhead. Another thump echoed from above. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to confirm she hadn't imagined it. Her pulse accelerated. The loft had been empty when she inspected it. She was certain of that. Slowly she reached for the flashlight sitting on the table. The beam trembled slightly as she pointed it toward the ladder leading upward. For several seconds, she listened. Nothing. The silence felt almost worse than the noise. Finally, she climbed. Each wooden rung creaked beneath her weight. The flashlight swept across dusty floorboards, old blankets, and storage boxes. Nothing moved. No animals, no intruders, no explanation. Emma exhaled slowly. Then the beam landed on something she had never noticed before. One of the storage trunks near the back wall stood partially open. She was sure it had been closed earlier. At first, she assumed she had simply overlooked it. Yet when she approached, another detail caught her attention. Fresh scratches marked the dust covering the lid, as if someone had opened it recently. Kneeling beside the trunk, Emma lifted the lid fully. Inside, she found stacks of old ranger manuals, weather reports, and maintenance logs. Most appeared decades old. She almost closed it again before spotting a dark leather notebook hidden beneath the papers. Her heartbeat quickened. The cover was cracked with age. No title, no label, just worn black leather. She carried it downstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. The first pages contained routine observations, weather conditions, wildlife sightings, trail inspections. Nothing unusual. Then she reached an entry dated September 1989. The handwriting changed slightly, becoming hurried and uneven. September 14th, generator failure again. Maintenance team says everything is functioning normally. It isn't. September 18th. Lights observed near Station 17 after midnight. No explanation. September 20th. Heard metal impacts near the old facility. Investigating tomorrow. Emma sat back. The notebook belonged to Daniel Ross. She knew it immediately. The name appeared several pages later. Suddenly, every strange event surrounding the cabin felt more important. She continued reading until sunrise. The entries grew increasingly unsettling. Daniel repeatedly mentioned unexplained power interruptions, strange sounds, equipment behaving erratically. Yet he never described anything supernatural. Instead, His writing suggested frustration, as though he believed there was a rational explanation he simply couldn't find. Then several pages had been torn out entirely. Emma stared at the jagged edges. Someone had removed them intentionally, not accidentally. The missing pages bothered her more than anything she had read. What had been written there? The following morning, the storm finally passed. The forest emerged, washed clean beneath pale sunlight. Emma spent an hour collecting fallen branches and inspecting storm damage. Several trees had come down near the stream. One had collapsed across part of the trail leading toward the ridge. While working, she noticed something unusual near the woodshed. Fresh soil. The disturbed patch beneath the floorboards looked different, larger, as if recent rain had exposed something buried beneath. She grabbed a shovel. At first, she intended only to satisfy her curiosity. 20 minutes later, she was still digging. The soil proved surprisingly loose. Several inches below the surface, the shovel struck metal. Clang. Emma froze. The sound matched the mysterious noise she had been hearing at night. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, she cleared away more dirt. A rusted steel plate emerged from the ground, roughly 3 feet wide. Heavy, old, not natural. She brushed mud away and discovered a metal ring attached to one side. A hatch. Someone had buried a hatch beneath the woodshed. Emma sat back in disbelief. The realization explained several things at once. The metallic sounds, the disturbed dirt, possibly even the footprints. Yet before attempting to open it, she decided she needed another opinion. An hour later, she drove into town. Finding Hank proved easy. He was repairing fencing behind a small cabin north of Alder Creek. When she showed him photographs of the hatch, his reaction was immediate. He stopped working, completely. "Where exactly did you find that?" Emma crossed her arms. "So you do know something." Hank remained silent. "You've been acting strange ever since I arrived," Emma continued. "You know about the cabin. You know about the symbols. You know about whatever's buried under that woodshed." Hank stared toward the mountains. For a moment, she thought he might finally tell her everything. Instead, he said, "You shouldn't open it alone." "That isn't a denial." "No." "What is it?" Hank sighed heavily. "I don't know exactly." Emma blinked. "What?" "I know it exists, that's all." He set down his tools. "Years ago, there were rumors about storage tunnels connected to the old ranger operations." "Tunnels?" "Maybe, maybe not." "You sound like everyone else around here." Hank almost smiled. "Because everyone else around here knows the same thing." Pieces. Before leaving, Hank agreed to visit the cabin the next day. It wasn't much, but it was more cooperation than she'd received so far. On her way back, she stopped at the diner. Linda greeted her immediately. "You look like somebody who found trouble." Emma laughed. "Is it that obvious?" Linda poured coffee. "In this town? Always." As they talked, Emma casually mentioned Daniel Ross. The waitress grew thoughtful. "My father knew him." Emma sat up straighter. "Really?" Linda nodded. "Said he was one of the most reliable people he'd ever met." "Then why did he leave?" Linda looked toward the window. "That's the question, isn't it?" She lowered her voice. "A week before he disappeared, he kept asking strange questions." "About what?" "The old power station." Emma felt a chill despite the warmth of the diner. Every clue led back to the same place. The power system, the abandoned facility. Daniel Ross. By late afternoon, she returned to the cabin carrying supplies and more questions than answers. The forest seemed unusually quiet, not threatening, just still, as if waiting. She spent the evening studying the notebook. Several additional references caught her attention. Station 17, power fluctuations, unauthorized activity. Then, near the back, she discovered a folded map tucked between two pages. Her pulse quickened immediately. It showed the area surrounding Black Pine Ridge. Several locations were circled in red. One was the abandoned foundation she had visited. Another marked the rusted electrical platform. A third location lay deeper in the wilderness beyond either site. Next to it, Daniel had written only 2 words: "Do not enter." Emma stared at the warning. The handwriting looked darker than the surrounding notes, as though written under pressure. She unfolded the map completely and compared it to Hank's copy. The mysterious red circle from Hank's map matched one of Daniel's markings exactly. That couldn't be coincidence. Night arrived quickly. Emma prepared dinner while repeatedly glancing at the newly discovered map. Whatever Daniel had been investigating before his disappearance, it connected multiple locations across the forest, locations somebody had gone to considerable effort to hide. Hours later, after darkness settled outside, she heard an engine approaching. Hank arrived carrying tools and a lantern. "Couldn't wait until tomorrow," he admitted. Together they walked to the woodshed. The hatch remained partially exposed. Rainwater glistened across its rusted surface. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Hank crouched beside it. "Well," he said quietly, "that's definitely real." Emma grabbed the metal ring. "Ready?" Hank nodded. The hatch resisted at first. Rust groaned. Dirt crumbled away. Then, with a loud metallic crack, it finally shifted. Cold air rushed upward from the darkness below. Both stepped back instinctively. Emma pointed the flashlight inside. A narrow shaft descended several feet underground. Concrete walls, metal ladder. Not a tunnel. Not exactly. More like an access chamber. The beam reached the bottom and revealed something unexpected. A steel door, hidden beneath the woodshed for decades. Hank stared into the darkness. His expression had become more serious than Emma had ever seen. "What is it?" she whispered. Hank didn't answer immediately. He simply kept staring at the door below. Then he said something that made Emma's stomach tighten. "I saw that door once before, about 25 years ago." Emma turned toward him. "What happened?" Hank looked away. The last person who opened it was Daniel Ross. Emma stared at Hank for several long seconds, convinced she had misheard him. The cold air rising from the underground chambers swirled around them while the flashlight beam remained fixed on the steel door below. "You knew Daniel Ross?" she finally asked. Hank nodded slowly. "Not well, but I knew him." Emma looked back down into the shaft. "And you never thought to mention that?" Hank rubbed a hand across his face. "You didn't ask the right question." "That's a terrible answer." "Probably." For a moment, neither moved. The discovery beneath the woodshed seemed to have transformed the entire atmosphere around the cabin. Suddenly, every strange story felt less like rumor and more like evidence. Hank eventually climbed down first. The ladder groaned beneath his weight. Emma followed carefully, gripping the flashlight tightly. At the bottom, the concrete walls felt surprisingly dry despite decades underground. The chamber appeared professionally built, government construction, functional rather than comfortable. The steel door stood directly ahead. A faded warning label remained attached near the handle, though most of the lettering had disappeared. Emma brushed away dirt and rust. Only a few words remained visible. Authorized personnel only. Definitely not a storage shed, she muttered. Hank examined the hinges. No. Can we open it? Only one way to find out. Together they pushed. At first, nothing happened. Then metal scraped against concrete. The door slowly swung inward, releasing another wave of stale air. Emma aimed her flashlight into the darkness beyond. The beam revealed a narrow corridor extending underground. Electrical conduits lined the walls. Old equipment cabinets stood open and empty. Dust covered everything. Looks like part of the power system, Hank said quietly. Emma took several cautious steps forward. The corridor led into a larger room. Rusted control panels occupied one wall. Most had been stripped of components years earlier. Yet enough remained to suggest the facility had once been operational. She walked between the equipment while studying faded labels. Generator controls, emergency power transfer, distribution systems. This was bigger than anyone described, she said. Hank nodded. A lot bigger. Then Emma noticed something unusual. One section of the floor showed signs of disturbance, not recent, but different from the surrounding dust. Kneeling, she brushed debris aside and found scratches in the concrete. Something heavy had once been dragged across the room. Hank. He walked over. See this? His expression darkened immediately. Yeah. What is it? I don't know. He paused. But it wasn't there when I saw this place. That answer sent another chill through her. The deeper they explored, the stranger things became. Several rooms branched off the main corridor. Most were empty. Storage areas, maintenance spaces, small offices. In one room, Emma discovered shelves filled with water-damaged binders. Most pages had deteriorated beyond recognition. Then she found a single file still intact. The cover read, Black Pine Field Operations. Her pulse quickened. She opened it immediately. Unfortunately, most documents had been removed. Only a handful remained. Equipment inventories, maintenance requests, nothing dramatic. Yet tucked inside the back cover sat a photograph. Emma carefully lifted it free. The image showed 5 people standing outside the facility decades earlier. 2 technicians, a supervisor, another unidentified worker, and Daniel Ross. Younger than she expected, smiling, alive. Found him, she said. Hank looked at the photograph for a long moment. That's definitely Daniel. Emma studied the faces. Everyone appeared relaxed, ordinary, not people caught up in some sinister mystery, which somehow made everything more unsettling. What had happened between that photograph and the stories that followed? The sun was setting by the time they returned to the surface. Both agreed it would take days to properly search the facility. Before leaving, Hank stood beside his truck and seemed to wrestle with a decision. Finally, he spoke. There was something else. Emma immediately paid attention. What? A week before Daniel disappeared, he came into town. And? Hank stared toward the mountains. He looked scared. That surprised her more than anything. Nothing in Daniel's notes suggested fear. Frustration, yes. Curiosity, definitely. But not fear. Did he tell you why? Hank shook his head. Just said he found something that didn't belong out here. What kind of something? Wouldn't say. The old man climbed into his truck. Get some sleep tonight. I haven't done much of that lately. You're going to need it. Then he drove away. Emma spent the evening inside the cabin examining the photograph and rereading Daniel's notebook. Now that she had seen the underground facility, several entries felt different, more urgent, more personal. She stopped at one particular note dated only 10 days before the journal ended. The station wasn't abandoned. Nobody told us the truth. Emma read the sentence 3 times. The station wasn't abandoned. What did that mean? Every local she had spoken to described the facility as abandoned decades ago. Yet Daniel clearly believed otherwise. Outside, temperatures continued dropping. The weather radio warned of possible snow within 48 hours. Emma added more wood to the stove and prepared dinner. For the first time since arriving, survival concerns were beginning to compete with the mystery. Winter was coming whether she solved anything or not. The next morning she woke before dawn. Frost covered the clearing. Thin sheets of ice lined sections of the stream. Emma spent hours gathering additional firewood. Every task required more effort in the cold. Carrying logs, hauling water, repairing gaps in the porch. Yet the work gave her time to think. Around midday, Noah arrived carrying supplies. "You look exhausted," he observed. "I've been exploring underground government facilities." Noah blinked. "That's either a joke or a very serious problem." Emma showed him photographs from the chamber. His reaction mirrored Hank's. Immediate recognition, immediate concern. "I've heard stories about this place my entire life," Noah said. "Nobody ever mentioned an actual underground complex. Apparently nobody mentions a lot of things." Together they studied Daniel's map. Noah pointed toward the third marked location, the one accompanied by the warning, "Do not enter." "This spot's farther north," he said. "Hard terrain. Not many people go there." "Ever been?" Noah shook his head. "No reason to." Emma couldn't stop staring at the mark. The warning felt deliberate, personal. Not the kind of note someone writes casually. Later that afternoon, Noah helped reinforce part of the roof before heading home. As he left, snowflakes drifted briefly through the air. Only a few, gone within minutes. Yet Emma noticed them. So did Noah. Neither mentioned the warning carved beside the cabin door. Neither needed to. That evening, she decided to search the loft again. The discovery of Daniel's notebook suggested there might be additional hidden items. For nearly an hour, she examined every corner. Most yielded nothing. Then, while moving an old storage chest, she heard a hollow sound beneath the floorboards. Her pulse quickened instantly. She knelt and tapped again. Hollow. Different from the surrounding wood. Emma grabbed a screwdriver and carefully pried up one narrow board. Beneath it lay a shallow compartment. Inside rested a metal box, small, locked, dust-covered. Her heart hammered as she carried it downstairs. The lock had long since rusted. After several minutes, she managed to force it open. Inside, she found 3 items: a compass, a folded letter, and a key. The compass appeared ordinary. The key did not. Heavy brass, industrial design, definitely old. Emma unfolded the letter carefully. The paper crackled with age. The handwriting belonged to Daniel Ross. "If anyone finds this, don't trust the official reports. They already know what happened. I left evidence where they can't erase it. If I'm gone before winter, follow the map. Do not let them seal it again." Emma stopped reading. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Outside, wind rattled the cabin windows. The first real snowflakes of the season began drifting down from the darkening sky. Yet Emma barely noticed. Her attention remained fixed on a single phrase: follow the map. Because for the first time, it sounded less like a warning from the past and more like instructions meant specifically for her. Snow continued falling through the night. By morning, a thin white layer covered the clearing around the cabin. Emma stood on the porch holding a mug of coffee, watching flakes drift through the silent forest. The scene should have felt peaceful. Instead, the warning carved beside the door seemed more unsettling than ever. Do not stay after the first snow. The first snow had arrived, and she was still there. A week earlier, she might have laughed at the idea of an old message influencing her decisions. Now she found herself glancing toward the woodshed and the hidden chamber beneath it. Too many strange things had happened. Too many clues pointed towards something larger buried beneath years of rumors and half-truths. She returned inside and unfolded Daniel Ross's map across the kitchen table. The third marked location stared back at her. The place accompanied by the handwritten warning, "Do not enter." Every piece of evidence seemed to point there. The underground station, the missing journal pages, the hidden letter. Whatever Daniel had discovered before he vanished appeared connected to that final location. Around mid-morning, Noah arrived carrying supplies and wearing an expression that suggested he had already heard the weather forecast. "You're not going to like this," he said. "That depends. More snow coming." Emma sighed. "How much?" "Enough that people in town are starting to prepare." He looked around the cabin. "You ready?" The honest answer was no. She had food, firewood, water, but winter in the wilderness demanded more than basic supplies. It demanded planning, experience, caution, things she was still learning. Yet her attention kept drifting toward the map. Noah noticed immediately. "You're thinking about going there?" Emma didn't bother denying it. Daniel left instructions. Noah studied the map. Or a warning. Same thing sometimes. He laughed quietly. That's exactly the kind of logic that gets people into trouble. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Noah pointed toward the marked location. "If you're serious, we need to know what's out there before the snow gets deeper." By noon, they were hiking north through the forest. The terrain changed gradually as they climbed. The familiar trails disappeared. Trees grew denser. Rocky ridges emerged from beneath the snow. Several times, Emma nearly slipped while crossing frozen sections of ground. Noah moved more confidently, occasionally stopping to point out landmarks or animal tracks. The deeper they traveled, the less evidence they found of human activity. No old forestry markers, no trails, no structures, just wilderness. 2 hours later, they reached a narrow valley hidden between steep slopes. Noah stopped first. "This is it." Emma looked around. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then sunlight reflected off something metallic, partially buried beneath snow and vegetation. They approached cautiously. What emerged from the landscape surprised both of them. Another facility, smaller than the underground station beneath the woodshed, but clearly connected. A concrete structure built directly into the hillside. Most of the roof had collapsed years earlier. Rusted fencing surrounded part of the site. The entrance door hung open. Emma's pulse quickened. This wasn't on any map. Noah nodded slowly. No kidding. The place felt forgotten, intentionally forgotten. Inside, the building contained only 2 rooms. Most equipment had been removed long ago. Yet unlike the underground station, this site showed signs of damage. Panels torn from walls, cabinets forced open, files scattered across the floor. Someone hadn't simply abandoned the facility. They had searched it thoroughly. Emma moved carefully through the debris. The air smelled of damp concrete and rust. Near the back wall, she found an overturned desk. Several drawers remained intact. Most were empty. Then she discovered a small notebook trapped behind the bottom drawer. Her heart immediately sped up. Noah. He joined her. The notebook belonged to neither Daniel nor any ranger. Instead, it contained technical notes written by someone named Martin Green. The entries described maintenance schedules and power distribution systems. Boring at first glance. Then the final pages changed. November 1989. Orders received to shut down northern operations. Equipment removal begins Monday. November 12th. Ross refuses to leave the matter alone. November 14th. They don't understand what happened here. November 16th. If anyone reads this, the collapse wasn't an accident. Emma stared at the words. Noah read over her shoulder. Neither spoke for several seconds. Collapse. Accident. The phrase instantly connected to Daniel's journal, to the abandoned facilities, to everything. She turned the page. The remaining entries had been ripped out. Again, another missing section, another deliberate removal. Somebody really hated records, Noah muttered. Emma nodded. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every trail led to missing information, hidden evidence, removed files. Yet enough fragments remained to reveal part of the truth. Something had happened in 1989, something involving a collapse. And afterward, people had worked very hard to erase details. The hike back proved more difficult. Snow intensified throughout the afternoon. Visibility dropped steadily. Several times they lost sight of landmarks and had to backtrack. By the time the cabin finally appeared through the trees, Emma's legs ached and her gloves were soaked. Yet despite the exhaustion, her mind raced. Collapse wasn't an accident. The sentence repeated endlessly. That evening, she invited Noah to stay for dinner rather than risk traveling home after dark. They sat beside the stove while snow accumulated outside. The cabin felt smaller now, cozier perhaps, yet also more isolated. During dinner, they discussed every clue discovered so far. Daniel Ross, the power facilities, the hidden chamber, the erased records, the mysterious symbol. None of it felt random anymore. It felt connected. Around 9 o'clock, a knock sounded at the door. Both froze. Visitors after dark had become increasingly unusual. Emma opened the door cautiously. Hank stood outside, covered in snow. His expression alone suggested something was wrong. You two need to see this. 20 minutes later, all three sat around the kitchen table. Hank had brought a battered cardboard box. The container looked decades old. Water stains covered the sides. Where did you get that? Emma asked. Hank set the box down carefully. Storage room at my place. What's inside? For a moment, he seemed reluctant to answer. Then he opened the lid. Photographs, reports, maps, dozens of them. Emma immediately recognized Daniel Ross in several images, much younger than in the picture she had found underground. Standing beside other workers, inspecting equipment, smiling, living an ordinary life before everything changed. Hank removed a folded report from the box. I've had this for years. Emma stared at him. You kept evidence? I kept memories. He sighed. Didn't think it mattered anymore. And now? Hank looked directly at her.
Now I think Daniel was trying to stop something.
The room fell silent. Noah leaned forward. Stop what? Hank unfolded the report. The document carried an official government header. Most of the text had faded, yet one section remained readable. Incident Summary. Northern Survey Team. Below it appeared several names. One line immediately captured Emma's attention. Casualties, 0. Missing personnel, 0. She frowned. Nobody died. Hank nodded slowly. That's what always bothered me. What do you mean? Hank pointed toward another photograph. The image showed a group of exhausted workers standing beside emergency vehicles. My brother was there. Emma blinked. This was the first time Hank had ever mentioned family. He helped during the rescue operation. Rescue operation? Noah asked. Hank nodded. There was a collapse in 1989. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Finally, a direct confirmation. What collapsed? Hank looked toward the fire. An underground survey site. And several people got trapped. Emma leaned forward. Were they rescued? Hank's expression became distant. That's the strange part. The room seemed to grow quieter. Even the wind outside felt muted. Hank slowly placed another photograph on the table. It showed Daniel Ross standing beside a cave entrance. Behind him were several exhausted workers covered in dirt and dust. Alive, every one of them. According to official records, Hank said quietly, the rescue happened exactly the way it should have. Emma looked from the photograph to the report. But Hank met her eyes. My brother swore those people were never supposed to survive. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything they had uncovered so far. Because for the first time, the mystery wasn't about a missing ranger. It wasn't about abandoned buildings or secret facilities. It was about an event that should have ended in tragedy. An event somebody had later tried to erase. And at the center of it all stood Daniel Ross. The storm arrived 2 days later. Not the gentle snowfall that had dusted the forest earlier, but a full winter storm rolling down from the mountains with enough force to transform the entire landscape overnight. Emma woke before dawn to the sound of wind hammering against the cabin walls. Snow rattled across the windows like handfuls of thrown gravel. For several seconds, she remained beneath her blankets, listening. The old structure groaned under each gust. The temperature inside had dropped noticeably despite the stove burning throughout the night. She sat up and immediately checked the weather radio. The forecast was worse than expected. Heavy snowfall, whiteout conditions, travel strongly discouraged. Emma stared at the small device. The timing couldn't have been worse. She still hadn't fully solved the mystery surrounding Daniel Ross, yet the wilderness was beginning to remind her that survival came first. She spent the next several hours focused entirely on practical tasks. Carrying firewood, melting snow for additional water, reinforcing a loose shutter that threatened to tear free whenever the wind intensified. Every chore took twice as long in the cold. By midday, snowdrifts had already begun forming around the cabin. The stream behind the property had nearly disappeared beneath ice. Looking outside felt like staring at a completely different world. During a brief lull in the storm, someone knocked on the door. Emma opened it to find Noah covered in snow from head to toe. "You're either very brave or very stupid," she said. Noah stepped inside quickly. "Probably both." He stamped snow from his boots and handed her a small backpack. "Extra batteries, some canned food. Figured you might need them." Emma smiled. "Thanks." Noah moved closer to the stove, holding out his hands toward the warmth. Road into town's almost gone. That bad? Worse. He glanced toward the windows. If this keeps up, nobody's going anywhere for a while. The reality settled heavily between them. Isolation was no longer theoretical. For the first time since arriving, Emma truly understood how remote the ranger cabin was. If something went wrong, help wouldn't arrive quickly. She and Noah spent the afternoon reviewing the photographs and reports Hank had provided. Several images showed the rescue operation following the collapse in 1989. The more Emma studied them, the more something felt wrong. "Look at this," she said. Noah leaned closer. She pointed toward a photograph showing Daniel Ross standing beside emergency personnel. "Everyone looks exhausted." They probably were. Not just tired. Emma tapped the image. "Look at their faces." Noah studied the photograph. Gradually, his expression changed. "They're shocked." Exactly. None of the people in the images looked relieved. They looked stunned, as though something had happened that nobody expected. Emma flipped through additional photographs. The pattern repeated: confusion, disbelief, unease. Then she found one image she had overlooked before. The photograph showed Daniel speaking with several officials near a vehicle. In the background stood a man holding a clipboard. Emma froze. "What?" Noah asked. She pointed toward a symbol visible on one of the equipment crates behind the group. A circle with a line through the center. The same symbol she had discovered carved into the tree. The same symbol nobody wanted to explain. Noah stared at it. "That's impossible." Apparently not. Suddenly, the symbol felt far more significant. It wasn't some random marking left in the woods. It was connected directly to the rescue operation, to Daniel Ross, to whatever had happened in 1989. By evening, Noah reluctantly prepared to leave. "You sure?" Emma asked. "Storm's getting worse." "I've got supplies at home." He pulled on his coat. "Besides, my mother would probably organize a search party if I disappeared overnight." Emma laughed. Fair point. Before leaving, Noah paused near the door. "Just be careful." "I always am." Noah raised an eyebrow. "You followed a map into a restricted wilderness site because a dead ranger left you a note." Emma smiled. "Okay, maybe not always." After he departed, silence returned. The storm continued intensifying. Darkness arrived early beneath the thick cloud cover. Emma settled beside the stove with Daniel's notebook and the old photographs spread across the table. Piece by piece, the puzzle was becoming clearer. There had been a collapse in 1989. People became trapped underground. Daniel somehow played a key role in their rescue, yet afterward, records disappeared. Facilities were abandoned. Evidence was removed. Why? What could possibly justify decades of secrecy around a successful rescue? Hours passed. Wind screamed through the trees. Snow accumulated against the walls. Emma eventually stood to add more wood to the stove. That's when she noticed something unusual. One photograph remained partially unfolded beneath the table. She crouched to retrieve it. The image showed the rescue site from a different angle. Most of the picture seemed ordinary. Then she noticed a sign visible near the edge of the frame. The lettering was blurry but still readable. North Survey Shaft 3. Emma's pulse quickened. Survey shaft. Not cave. Not mine. Survey shaft. The collapse hadn't occurred naturally. It happened at an active excavation site. She immediately searched through the remaining documents. Several minutes later, she found another report referencing geological surveys conducted during the late 80s. Most details had been blacked out or removed, but enough remained to establish a timeline. A team had been studying underground formations in the area. Then something went wrong. Very wrong. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Martin Green's notebook. The collapse wasn't an accident. Emma sat back slowly. If the collapse wasn't accidental, then someone had caused it. The realization changed everything. Outside, a violent gust slammed against the cabin hard enough to shake the walls. Snow burst through a small gap near one window. Emma stood and stuffed a towel into the opening. Survival first, mystery second, at least for tonight. Yet even while performing mundane tasks, her thoughts kept circling the same question. Who would deliberately cause a collapse at a remote survey site? And why? Around midnight, the power mystery returned in an unexpected way. Emma had just finished checking supplies when a faint glow appeared outside. She froze instantly. Light. The same unnatural white light she had seen before. This time, it wasn't far away. It appeared somewhere beyond the trees near the old power facility. She rushed to the window. The glow remained visible for several seconds. Then another appeared farther uphill. Two lights, moving, not stationary, not reflections. Someone was out there, in the middle of a blizzard. Emma grabbed binoculars from a shelf and focused on the distant glow. Through swirling snow, she managed to make out silhouettes. Two people, maybe three. Difficult to tell. They carried lanterns or flashlights while moving toward the ridge. Her pulse accelerated. No local would choose tonight for a casual hike. Whoever they were, they had a reason for being out there. The lights eventually vanished behind the trees. Emma remained at the window long afterward. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Had someone else discovered the underground station? Were they searching for the same thing Daniel had hidden, or had they been there all along? The following morning brought no relief. The storm had worsened overnight. Snowdrifts reached halfway up the porch steps. Opening the front door required considerable effort. Emma immediately checked the surrounding area. Visibility remained poor. Yet one discovery erased any lingering hope that she had imagined the lights. Fresh tracks crossed the clearing. Human tracks. Several sets. They emerged from the forest, passed near the woodshed, and disappeared toward the stream. Emma followed them as far as conditions allowed. The tracks stopped abruptly where snow had drifted deeper. Whoever made them had moved through the property sometime during the night. While she stood examining the prints, something else caught her attention. A piece of fabric snagged on a low branch near the woodshed. Dark green, torn recently. She carefully removed it. Not camping gear, not hunting clothing. The material looked heavier, almost uniform-like. Her pulse quickened. Someone had definitely been here, and they had come close enough to leave evidence behind. Later that afternoon, Hank arrived unexpectedly on a snowmobile. The sight alone revealed how serious conditions had become. He climbed off the machine and immediately noticed Emma's expression. "What's wrong?" She showed him the fabric. Hank's face darkened instantly. "Where'd you get this?" "Near the woodshed." He examined it closely. "I've seen material like this before." Emma waited. Hank looked toward the forest. "Government issue." Silence followed. The wind howled around the cabin. Emma stared at him. "Government." Hank nodded. Old survey teams used jackets made from this exact fabric. Emma felt a chill unrelated to the weather. Survey teams from 1989? Hank hesitated. Maybe. Maybe. Or somebody who wants us to think that. Neither possibility felt comforting. Before leaving, Hank delivered another warning. If anyone's moving around out here during a storm like this, they're not doing it for recreation. Emma watched him disappear into the snowfall. As darkness settled again over Black Pine Ridge, she sat alone beside the stove, holding the torn piece of fabric. Outside, the storm continued. Somewhere beyond the trees, hidden beneath snow and decades of secrets, lay the final truth about Daniel Ross. And for the first time, Emma was no longer certain she was the only person searching for it. The storm finally broke 3 days later. Emma noticed the change immediately. The constant howl of wind faded. Snow stopped hammering against the walls. When she opened the cabin door at sunrise, a strange silence greeted her. The entire wilderness had been transformed. Snow covered everything. Trees bent beneath white blankets. The stream had disappeared beneath ice. The world looked untouched, frozen in time. Yet Emma's attention remained fixed on the tracks and the torn fabric lying on the kitchen table. Somebody had been out there. Somebody who seemed connected to the same mystery she had been unraveling for weeks. After breakfast, she made a decision. The next trip would be her last. Whatever Daniel Ross had hidden, she would find it now or leave the mystery unsolved forever. Winter conditions were becoming too dangerous to keep chasing clues indefinitely. Around mid-morning, Noah arrived on snowshoes carrying additional supplies. Hank followed an hour later. For the first time since Emma had arrived at Black Pine Ridge, all three sat together around the same table. Maps covered every available surface. Photographs, journal pages, survey reports, Daniel's hidden letter. The pieces finally formed a picture. "The survey site collapsed," Noah said. "Daniel helped rescue everyone." Hank nodded. But somebody wanted the incident buried afterward. Emma studied the map. The question is why? Nobody answered. Then her eyes landed on a notation she had overlooked before. It appeared in the margin of Daniel's map near the final marked location. Fallback Archive. The words were barely visible beneath water damage. Emma sat upright. "Look at this." Both men leaned closer. Hank frowned immediately. Archive. Noah read the words twice. That sounds important. Emma felt excitement building. Not treasure, not money. Evidence. Daniel had hidden evidence. Suddenly, the purpose of everything became clear. The underground station, the missing pages, the warnings. Daniel wasn't trying to hide from people. He was trying to preserve something. By noon, they were moving north through the snow-covered wilderness. Travel proved exhausting. Snow reached knee-height in several places. The cold air burned Emma's lungs. Yet every difficult step felt purposeful. This wasn't a random search anymore. They had a destination. Hours later, they reached the remote survey site once again. The ruined structure looked even more abandoned beneath the snow. However, this time, they continued past it. Daniel's notation pointed farther uphill toward a narrow ridge overlooking the valley. The climb was brutal. More than once, Emma nearly lost her footing. Noah helped her across an icy section near the summit. Hank remained quiet throughout the journey, conserving energy. Eventually, they reached the ridge. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The landscape stretched endlessly beneath them. Mountains, forest, snow. Nothing else. Maybe we're in the wrong place, Noah said. Emma shook her head. No. Something felt right. She pulled out Daniel's map and compared landmarks. Then she noticed it, a row of stones protruding from the snow near the edge of the ridge. Not natural. Deliberately placed. They approached carefully. The stones formed a rough rectangle. Beneath them lay a rusted metal hatch almost completely hidden by vegetation and snow. Emma stared at it. Another hidden entrance. Daniel had concealed it well. Working together, they cleared enough debris to open the hatch, unlike the underground station beneath the woodshed. This chamber was much smaller. A narrow ladder descended into darkness. Emma climbed first. The flashlight revealed a compact storage room. Shelves lined the walls. Waterproof containers sat stacked neatly in one corner. The room felt untouched, preserved, waiting. I think we found it, she whispered. Noah climbed down beside her. Hank followed. The first container held documents, hundreds of pages, reports, survey records, personal notes, maintenance logs. Many carried official government markings. The second container held photographs and audio tapes. The third contained something even more important. Original rescue reports. Emma opened one carefully. Her pulse quickened as she read. The truth finally emerged. In 1989, a geological survey team had become trapped when part of an underground excavation collapsed. Initial assessments concluded nobody could survive. Officials ordered recovery operations rather than rescue efforts. Daniel Ross disagreed. According to the reports, he spent nearly 2 days searching alternative access routes through unstable tunnels. Eventually, he located a surviving air pocket and guided rescuers to the trapped workers. Every member of the survey team survived. Emma smiled despite herself. Daniel had been a hero. Yet the story didn't end there. Additional documents explained the secrecy. The collapse resulted from unauthorized blasting conducted by a private contractor attempting to accelerate the project. Several officials approved the decision despite safety concerns. Had the truth become public, careers would have ended. Lawsuits would have followed. The easiest solution was to bury everything. The project closed. Records disappeared. Facilities were dismantled. Daniel refused to cooperate. Instead, he copied evidence and hid it. The room fell silent as the realization settled over them. No supernatural conspiracy, no treasure, no government experiment, just something more human. Negligence, cover-ups, pride, and one ranger unwilling to let the truth disappear. Hank lowered himself onto a storage crate. His eyes remained fixed on a photograph showing Daniel beside the rescued workers. He was right, he said quietly. Emma looked up. About what? Everything. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Snow drifted gently outside the hidden archive. The mystery that had consumed decades was finally solved. Later that evening, they returned to the cabin carrying copies of the most important documents. Over the following weeks, as winter tightened its grip on Black Pine Ridge, the evidence was shared with historians, journalists, and surviving family members connected to the rescue. The story spread far beyond Alder Creek. Former survey workers came forward. Families shared memories. Forgotten records resurfaced. Gradually, the truth became impossible to ignore. Daniel Ross was finally recognized for what he had done. Not a missing ranger, not a cautionary tale, a hero. Months later, spring arrived. Snow melted from the mountains. The stream flowed freely again. Green returned to the forest. Emma stood on the cabin porch one morning, watching sunlight filter through the trees. The property looked different now. Not because the wilderness had changed, because she had changed. When she first arrived, she had been running from loss, a failed relationship, a lost job, a future that seemed uncertain. Somewhere along the way, the cabin stopped feeling like an inheritance and started feeling like home. Noah visited regularly. Hank no longer avoided difficult conversations. Even Earl at the gas station seemed happy to tell stories now that the mystery had finally been solved. One afternoon, Emma walked to the woodshed and looked at the hatch concealed beneath it. She smiled. The secret hidden beneath Black Pine Ridge had never been gold or treasure. It had been a man's reputation, a truth preserved long enough for someone to uncover it. Before returning inside, Emma glanced once more at the old warning carved beside the cabin door. Do not stay after the first snow. She laughed quietly. The message had frightened her the first night she arrived. Now she understood it differently. Maybe it had been written by someone trying to protect others from a mystery they didn't understand. Or maybe it was simply another piece of local folklore. Either way, she had ignored it. And because she stayed, Daniel Ross was no longer forgotten. The ranger cabin was no longer abandoned, and for the first time in many years, Emma Carter finally knew exactly where she belonged.